Hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist, here to talk all things narratives, reports, and comprehension. Yes, we've added comprehension. It's going to be consistent, and today we have a couple of things to chat about. So we're reviewing the report writing paragraphs 2 and 3. We're also looking at dialogue again with narratives. And then for comprehension, we're tacking back to poetry and fiction because I really wanted to show you the similarities between the poetry and fiction and to show students how they can like really maximize on the information that they have with poetry and narratives to really get into the details of it. So, for those of you who are new to the live, just in case this is your first one, I am Shelley Edwards Barron and I'm a creative writing specialist. And I absolutely love talking about creative writing and comprehension these days too. And I use something called multisensory learning. So for me, it's all about engaging students in ways that they aren't normally engaged so that they can really get involved and interact with the creative writing. And I believe that writing and reading are like two sides of the same coin. So that's why I've decided to add in comprehension now. Because in the earlies, I usually really only looked at the creative writing, reports and narratives, but lots of people have been asking about comprehension notes, so I've added in a bit of comprehension as well. All right. So if you want to know a little bit more about me, you can go back to the first couple episodes where I spent a lot of time explaining, why I got into this and how I, approach the instruction. But for today, since we have just a limited time, I want to stick to the hour today. That's always the plan because I know you're busy people. Just to give you the highlights and the tips so that you can go practice them. I really want to get into the reports. And here's the thing with the reports. So if you're following the schedule and you're working with the practice that we're dealing with, and by the way, if you don't have a copy of the revised schedule for January to March, please take a look at the files section in the um, SEA Peacefield approach. If you're not in that group, I recommend definitely joining that group. Lots of support happening there with the math and the creative writing, grammar, everything. Anything that you can think of, even just trying to figure out how to manage study time and work with your kids and not get frustrated, then you'd really get lots of support there. So join the group if you're not already a part of the group, and check in the files section and download the study schedules. So you would find for this program, what I did is that I listed out the topics that we'll be covering between now and the exam, and each one would focus. So we have for report writing, separate from narrative writing, separate from the comprehension, so you can have that study schedule and be able to follow along. Now, in our list of studies, let's see, today is the 13th of February, and so we're looking at, like I said, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the report writing, and we'll get into that. And then when we get to the narratives, I'll tell you, what and what we'll be doing and so on. But definitely get a copy of the study schedule because that kind of takes you through a series of practice um, ideas. You have the outline so that you know what to cover. I know part of doing the studies and reviewing is sometimes knowing what to review and when to review it, as well as how to review it. So that's what we're going to be dealing with in session today to explain to you what you're doing this week while you're reviewing and how much time you're going to be spending on it. And so the recommendation that I usually give is to spend roughly about 2 hours on each topic. So you're working with 2 hours on reports, 2 hours on narratives, 2 hours on comprehension, but of course, not all at the same time. So here's how you're breaking it up. So for the reports, you're spending a 30-minute session early in the week, maybe this evening, tomorrow, and then after that, at another time, you spend another 30-minute session, and then finally you do a 1 hour session where you write a complete report. And that's the format for the reports and the narratives. And then it's a slight different thing with the comprehension, because the practice tests with the comprehension, they are a little bit longer than just the 1 hour. I think it's like about 75 minutes, so that's an hour and 15 minutes, but not too much longer. So it's still kind of within the same kind of strategy. And so you don't have to double up. Of course, if you're doing a lot and you're trying to work on it, you can double up, but you don't have to. So that gives you 6 days a week of study with the creative writing and the comprehension. And then you can have 1 day break, brain cooler, relax, and then you go at it again. Right? So for this week, we're dealing with reports, and we're looking at the paragraphs 2 and 3. So let's just do a quick review of what goes into paragraphs 2 and 3, and then we will talk about for the different types of reports. Because, of course, I advocate that 5 paragraph structure, and depending on the type of report, then what goes into paragraph 2 and 3 would be slightly different. And so if your child is having any trouble with what goes into a report, then last term I covered each type of report, going through every single paragraph, what to put in each of these. And so you would want to go back to the archives, and you can find them on YouTube or in SEA Peaceful Approach or on my Facebook page, Wood Coach Youth, and you're looking for these episodes. I'm going to type them up so that you could see them. We're dealing with episode 30. Ooh, let me just get that number. All right, so we're going from, actually, it's from episode 27 to episode 32, and that would give you um from incident reports, accident, competition, activity, event, and natural disasters. Natural disasters is episode 32. The incidents would be episode 27. And so if you want to review those and you think you want to go to any one in particular, you can check the episodes and see which one would help you the most. And so we go incident, accident, competition, activity, event, and then natural disasters in that order. And so those are the episodes. And so in each of those, you'd get a reminder of what goes into paragraph 1 and what goes into paragraph 2, 3, 4, and 5, because, like I said, I work with a 5 paragraph structure. But this week, you're reviewing paragraphs 2 and 3 for the different types of reports. And so you want to make sure that your child understands, in general, what goes into paragraphs 2 and 3. And so your first 30-minute session, when you work with the review, you're starting with that first 30-minute session. What generally goes into paragraphs 2 and 3? So what is the template? So here's the template. So paragraph 2 has what happens before. And so this is kind of like the beginning of the situation, because it's important that readers know where everybody is before things began. So if you're reporting on a bullying incident, then how is it that you were in the vicinity to be able to witness this? Where were you coming from? Where were you going? What were you doing? And what did you see before things started? That's what you have to describe. If you're dealing with an accident, again, where were you going? Where were you coming from? What was happening just before the accident? If you're dealing with a competition, then here's where we get some variation, where you would have to give like rules and guidelines, and how is the competition being judged? How are the judges going to identify winners and allocate points, you want to give like a really brief summary of that. And if you have enough time, you can give like the beginning of it, like, the opening ceremony, if you have that. Because like a competition like football, for example, whoever scores the most goals wins. So then you really don't have a whole lot of rules to describe, because you don't need to get into the rules of football. It's one of those general things. So this kind of competition, then you would want to give, the beginning of the competition. If it's one of those situations where it's a new kind of competition, then you want to list out the rules, and that would be fine. If it's an activity, activities would have guidelines, not rules, because we're not identifying winners and losers. What we're looking for is, this is what the activity is. This is how you perform the activity. Maybe people are gathering supplies. Maybe the teacher is explaining what they want and those kinds of things. And maybe somebody is also explaining the purpose of the activity. That's what you put into paragraph 2 of an activity report. For an event report, usually an event has a series of things happening. And so you might have like a guest speaker. So, introduction of the guest speaker and the beginning of the presentation. If it's like a concert or something, maybe you might want the opening ceremony for the concert and any introductions and maybe the first one or two acts in the concert. So, depending on the type of report you're writing, you're going to be putting different kinds of information in paragraph 2. But there's sort of like a template, and you can create a template. So, accident reports, you write this, incident reports, that, and so on. And if you noticed in what I shared just now, there are also ways that you can group ideas. So it's not necessarily that you have to learn all the things for the accidents and all the things for the incidents and all the things, etc. Because we're kind of into crunch time. So we're looking for strategies and ways to maximize the effort and the time that we have left. So, what we're going to be doing then is looking at the fact that incidents and accident reports really have a very similar format. So, your paragraph 2 of an incident and an accident report would be quite similar. So, you have that style to follow. An activity and a competition are very similar. The only difference really is that some competitions would have winners, activities don't. And so they're very similar. So the structure of what you put into that paragraph 2 of a competition and an activity report are quite similar. So you're learning those things. Event reports are a little bit different, because depending on the event, then you might have some variation. So when you look at it, you really paying attention to three styles for a paragraph 2. Now, we do have the natural disaster report to consider, but to be honest, I do not believe that a natural disaster report will come. Um, we only really do have two types, well, two experiences with the report writing, 2019 past paper and 2022 past paper. But in those two, if you study them, you'd realize that accidents, incidents, competitions, events, those are the more the focus. So out of the six reports that we have in the SE exam setting, none of them were natural disaster. So I'm not saying that they will never come, but I don't think that a natural disaster, this is my personal opinion here, that a natural disaster is something that will be tested. In any event, you will not have three natural disaster reports. So I would say focus on the five that would give you the best options. Because again, crunch time, now we're looking at strategies. We've already done the background and everything, but now we're looking at strategies to really maximize the time and the effort in preparation going into the exam. So that's for paragraph two. And paragraph three is the main focus. And when I say main focus, once you identify the type of report that is being responded to, then what happens is that in paragraph three, that's where you would put the details, the step by step. And the trick with doing this is making sure that you have at least, I would say five, three to five. Three is kind of on the low end. If the child is struggling, five is average. If you can get maybe one or two more, then as if the child can write really well and there's, the time in terms of filling in the details is okay, then you really want to work with an average of five steps or five actions in whatever the situation is. So if it's an accident, five steps that happened during the accident. If it's an incident, five steps that happened during the incident. So for example, um, I'm using the bullying as an example with the incidents a lot because I've seen students when they get to this step in paragraph three, they tend to summarize things and give their ideas or opinions on what happened. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, for example, um, a student might say, they observed another student bullying another one and they took their money, and that's it. That's the whole thing. That's the whole um process of the incident. But when you're looking at incidents and accidents and any kind of report, actually there are steps that happen. So, how did the child take the other child's money, for example? Did they, push them against the wall, put their hand in the pocket and take it themselves? Or did they strike the other child and push them to the ground and then push the hand in the pocket and take it out? So, what are the actual actions that took place that lead up to and in the process of the act of bullying? And those are the details that you want to identify. And so here is where things can get interesting and a little bit exciting. So we do have to be cautious about the descriptions of these things. So we don't want to talk about running, like I ran to this and I was happy and proud because sometimes like students might say, okay, um they were afraid or they were worried and things like that within the bullying situation. But remember, this is a report. And so I'm going to pause here just a little bit to remind you of something. I had a student tell me that he added in some extra details because he wanted to make the report exciting. And I've had several students tell me that, for example, they wanted to make the report exciting. Here's the thing, a report isn't supposed to be exciting. Narratives are supposed to be exciting and interesting and have all the descriptions and so on. Reports are supposed to be a representation of what you observed. End of story. What you observed doesn't have to be exciting, it is what you observed. Now, having said that, if students are able to give sufficient details, the report will be interesting enough and it wouldn't feel like if they're like eating cardboard trying to read this thing and get the information. It will flow, and if you use the formal tone and the formal language and the transitions and the sentence structures that are complex, etc., etc., the report will flow and it will be read easily and effectively and it will be okay. So you don't have to try to deliberately make the report interesting on top of all the details. Just focus on, especially in paragraph three, giving the details of what happened, action by action. And in doing that, you would have covered what is necessary to make the report interesting, and that would be the end of that. You're not going to have to put any extra details, like somebody fell in the mud and got dirty and all those things. You're not necessarily going to have to add things like that to make it feel exciting and interesting. A report is as interesting as the details that you include. So just focus on the details and giving those details in an objective, formal kind of way. So pay attention to your adjectives and your adverbs. Make sure that they are appropriate for reports. Pay attention to how you describe things. Make sure it's appropriate for a report. So you're not really looking at making it exciting and interesting, but you are paying attention to making sure you have sufficient details. And doing that means, I would say, average about 5 actions or 5 steps. So let's say a student slipped in some water and injured themselves, then you might want to say something like, the student was walking along the corridor and they stepped into the water. They one leg went to the left and they hit the ground. They clasped their ankle and said out loud that they were in pain, adding some, reported speech, things like that. Somebody immediately proceeded to contact the class teacher. So those are details that when you write them out, not in that hesitating kind of awkward way I just did, but when you write them out in effective sentences, you have enough information, 3 to 4 sentences in your paragraph 3, and you're good. And it's going to be interesting because you gave that step by step, action by action, what took place. And that is how you make a report interesting, not by adding in descriptions, the student cried out in pain and so on. That's going to get you in trouble because that is narrative territory and you want to stay away from that. So that's what you do in paragraphs 2 and 3. So your study time this week, here's what you're doing. Your first 30-minute session, focus on what goes generally into your paragraphs 2 and 3. Your second 30-minute session, you're practicing some writing of what goes into paragraphs 2 and 3. And so you might want to cover like maybe 3 types of reports. Because remember, we're aiming for about 30 minutes. And so a student might spend 10 minutes on each type. So you cover 3. And I would recommend like maybe an accident incident, because remember, those are similar. And then you do a competition or an activity, because remember, those are similar. And then you do an event. So those are the 3 that you're working with, either incident or accident, um, then either competition or activity, and then you work on an event. And so you're practicing the paragraphs 2 and 3. Now, of course, you want to do a quick plan um, before you write so that the student can always practice planning. Remember, we're building as we go. We're not only focusing on what we're studying in the moment. We're building as we go. So this week, then, when you get to that point, do a quick plan, what's going to go into the report, and then you write the paragraphs 2 and 3 and see how that goes. Make sure the student gets some details and so on. And based on whichever ones you think might be giving the child some trouble, then you can check out the archived episodes between episode 27 and 32 and choose the one that covers the type of report that you want to get more information on, and you will get some support and a background with that. And so that is pretty much the focus for the for the reports. And let me see, there's another episode that I think, um, if you want to look at, for example, the 5 paragraph structure, you want to get a review of that. I did that early on. So report structure. I did that in episode 4. And then if you want a checklist, I did that in episode, let me check it and I'll tell you exactly. Episode 13. Right? So if you want to do a review on the whole 5 paragraph structure, then you go to episode 4, and that's what I cover for reports in that episode. And then for the checklists, I did that in episode 13. Now, of course, remember I do both reports and narratives in in every episode. Reports are usually in the first part, and narratives are in the second part. So with the report structure, you're looking at the first like 30 minutes of the video, and that would cover the report section and give you that 5 paragraph report structure. With the checklists, I did both narratives and report checklists in episode 13, so you'd get both there if you wanted to review that. So that's it for reports. You're working on paragraphs 2 and 3. You have your spread, 30 minutes of review generally, then 30 minutes of practice writing, and then your next session, which would be roughly an hour, is when you're presenting prompts and having the student write an entire report. But of course, you're paying most attention to how they managed the paragraphs 2 and 3 in terms of the kind of information they present. And I recommend mixing the prompts so that they're not getting like all narratives. Sorry, they're not getting like all incidents or all accidents kind of thing. So you mix it up. And so for those of you who are still looking for prompts and you want samples and those kinds of things, you can check my report writing challenge booklets. I call it the 5 reports challenge. The cost is 135. And for this, you get so that same thing that I was telling you about, that step by step, you get that. But I guess what you would most be interested in is the sample reports that you get for each of the types of reports. So you actually get 6 sample reports in this series, and you get like about, let's say, 18 prompts, because you get 3 prompts for each type of report. You'd get 3 incident, 3 accident, 3 competitions, etc., etc. So what I recommend doing is that you can pull randomly from those prompts and create a new list with 1 incident, 1 competition, 1 activity, so your child will have a choice to respond to, and they're not like studying individual reports. And what you can do, if you've had the series for a while and you're using it over and over and you're running out of prompts at this point, then make some minor changes to the prompts. So let's say, for example, the prompt said, a medical professional um visited your school, change the medical professional to maybe a government official or something like that. And so just make 1 or 2 modifications to the prompt itself, and then you have exponential amount of prompts that you can get from that cache of 18 prompts for report writing. So to get a copy, if you're interested, WhatsApp me, please. Um, and you can WhatsApp me at 717-4993. I'm going to put my number up, and you can get that report writing series. So not only are you going to get the prompts and the samples, but if you're still having any kind of challenges with different sections of the reports, you will get that step by step, paragraph by paragraph, so that you can see some more details of it, so that you can just use the sample and study that and see how the paragraphs 2 and 3 were developed. You can do that on the first session when you're looking at what generally goes into the reports at paragraphs 2 and 3. Study the sample at that point so that your next session you can do some writing. And so I guess now is a good time to say it. I have been promising some additional samples. For those of you who have purchased those booklets, you have those 6 samples, but they've already been reviewed and so on. I am finally finished. Yes. With the new set of samples. Now, it was a lot. It took a lot of doing, but I got them done. And so let me show you. So I only managed to get through 3 of each. And so in this new sample series, and this is just straight up samples, but of course, you know me, I'm a teacher. I can't just give you samples by themselves. So I'm going to give you a copy of the 5 paragraph structure as well, and a review of the 12 points. So at least you could have it when you review the narratives and the reports. And so this is what you'd be getting. So I did an activity, event, and incident because, like I said, activities and competitions are similar. Events are on their own because of their structure, and then incidents and accidents are similar. So I've given you the 3 sections that I think are worth studying because you can kind of create a template out of that. And then for the narratives, realistic fiction, because I know a lot of students write realistic fiction and they find it a little bit challenging to make the realistic fiction seem interesting. But you can get a very exciting and interesting realistic fiction, even though it's something that could actually happen in real life. It's just a matter of how you make the descriptions. And then, so there's an action story because I know lots of students like action. And then I love the idea of students writing folklore, especially our local folklore and fairy tale stories. So I've included one of those as well. And so so you have these. They are now available. I am so proud to say, after like nearly a month of promising, they are currently available. And so you can WhatsApp me to get your copy. You can message me on Facebook. The cost is $50. So I am trying to make it as accessible as possible. So you get the document. So this is what it is: SEA creative writing samples, review what a good one looks like, and you're getting all six in one booklet with the, yeah, like I said, I couldn't help myself. So I added in the 5 paragraph format as a reminder, and then the 12 point plot as a reminder. For those of you who've been following, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, send me a message and I'll send you the links to the videos that I focused on all of these. And so you can get that copy, right? And so we do have samples. Finally, the samples are available. I'll be putting up the information in SAP Peaceful Approach plus my Facebook page, and so that you can get the contact information and everything and get your samples that you could review them. So if you have the 5 reports series, you would have 6 and then these 3. So that would give you 9 altogether. For the narratives, let's shift over to narratives now. And yeah, every episode I come when I do the discussion, when I'm transitioning from reports to narratives, I think, oh, where's my transition screen? I keep forgetting it. I'll remember one of these days, maybe for the next season when I'm doing SEA 2025. But so, okay, so we're moving on to the narratives. And with narratives, we're talking dialogue. So, of course, at this point, we're reviewing dialogue. So, students should not be new to dialogue or hearing about dialogue for the first time. At this point, we're getting into practicing dialogue and really getting that integration of dialogue into stories, making speech feel realistic, making it feel like a natural part of the story, how getting students to practice revealing details with the speech, showing emotions with the speech, and the what you call it, the dialogue tags and the action beats and all those things. So that is what you are kind of doing a quick review, and then you're practicing, and then you're implementing into a narrative. So again, I did each of those situations that I just mentioned, integrating, introduction, mastering, all those things. We've covered those already. So for dialogue, what you want to do, if you really need that review and you're not sure, you're going to episodes. Um, oh, I just had it and it disappeared. Right, episode 22 to 24, right? So you're going into the archives for dialogue and you're checking episodes 22 to 24 if you really want to get that detailed integration. So episode 22 was an introduction to dialogue. So and in that session, I explained, okay, what is dialogue, how it's different from speech and thinking out loud, and why students need to know all of them. So I'll just give you a quick recap. Dialogue is a conversation between two people. And so stories really should have at least one other person for the character to talk to have that dialogue. However, if the story is about just one character, that character can have like an internal conversation. And so in one of the sample stories that I did, had like good angel, bad angel conversation happening. You can do something like that and still get the benefit of dialogue, even if there is like one main character happening. No, I just saw a glitch, so I'm hoping that you guys are still hearing me and hearing me clearly. So you let me know if it cut out at any point or if I have to repeat anything, right? But yeah, so you do know that dialogue is a conversation. I just said that just in time for it to glitch. Oh, technical difficulties will not get us today. It's being recorded, and so you will get this information on dialogue. But of course, you have the 3 episodes that you can go back to. Um, Now, with the one thing I want to say here, and I can't remember if I said that before, because like this is episode 38 and we're talking episodes 22 to 24. I really can't remember exactly what I said, but with dialogue, because there's a difference between speech and this actual conversation in a dialogue, I want to remind you that having characters kind of like think out loud or, mentioning what characters are thinking, that is something that you should also do in a story. It's separate from dialogue, and I'm not saying do dialogue instead. What I'm saying is do dialogue in addition to these things. Because readers aren't in the characters' minds, and so they would love to know what the character is thinking. So adding in this information about what the character is thinking is going to be very useful. And I think it's something worth exploring. So then what you're dealing with is going through that introduction to dialogue, what it is, what is an action beat, what is a dialogue tag, how to create them, how to use them, um, integrating, mastering dialogue. So, how to decide what to put in the dialogue. Because here's what you don't want to have: hi, good morning, how are you? Yeah, I'm good. That is not the kind of dialogue that is going to be useful for your story, for an essay narrative. Now, if you're writing like a full-blown novel, you can use those kinds of mundane conversations to sort of establish interaction and to show, like the in a relationship how people are trying to be, aloof and objective, and keep people at a distance so they're not really, loving them and saying, hey, what's up? And so you can use that in a lengthy novel, in a flash fiction, which is what students are writing for SEA. We don't have time for all that build up, and the tension has to come as quickly as possible. And so just a quick plug here, your conflict in a narrative, and you absolutely must have, because this is the kind of stories that SEA is promoting, those that have conflict and the resolution of conflict and so on. And so we don't want just those, nice life kind of, I woke up, it was a beautiful day, I went exploring and I had fun and I came back home. No, something needs to happen while you're exploring and get you, your adrenaline pumping and your heart racing, and, make you think that all is lost and some kind of problem, and several problems if you're following the 12 point, which is what you need to be doing if you want to get rising action properly. um you really do need that kind of distress. So in a narrative, you want that distress to begin either at the end of paragraph 1 or at the beginning of paragraph 2. You need it to happen quickly, so you don't have time to sort of build up with the dialogue and get into the mood. You have to come out, guns blazing, as they say. So then you have to know what dialogue is going to make the most sense. So maybe practice writing the dialogue and then cutting off the first part and just sticking to like maybe the middle 2 or 3 points, because you don't even want to have the goodbyes and all those things either. You want just the main section of the dialogue. And so that's something that you want to look at. And so this week, when you're working on your stories and practicing stories and focusing on dialogue, in your first 30-minute session, and the narrative discussion and practice review would follow the same kind of practice review that the reports would. So you have two 30-minute sessions on 2 different days, and then the full on where you're writing a full story. And so your first 30-minute session should be a review on what dialogue is, what it should look like, your punctuation, because there are some tips with punctuation with dialogue. For example, when you use a dialogue tag, you use a comma within the quotation marks. If you're using an action beat, you use a full stop. So go back to the intro and the mastering and the integrating dialogue, episodes 22, 23, and 24, if you're not familiar with those and you want to get a quick review. But certainly you want to do that review in an abbreviated form, so you're not showing your child these episodes. You are going through the episodes and you're pulling out the main things based on what you understand that your child is struggling with. Because again, at this point, we're being strategic with our development and we're not covering everything over. We're looking at what areas we're having trouble with and we're trying to support those, right? So you're going to go through it, pull out the details, create a checklist or a spreadsheet or a document that you could print or even write it out and present to your child. And that's what you're discussing on that first 30-minute session. What is the format for dialogue? What should it look like? What you should include and not include in a dialogue? That's what you're discussing in your first 30-minute session. In your second 30-minute session, you're practicing with dialogue. And at this point, you're not practicing with random dialogue just to see that your child knows how to do it. You're practicing dialogue within a context. And in that context, what I mean is you're pulling out a prompt and you're looking at the prompt, you're doing that quick plot so you can have your conflict, and you're deciding and discussing where dialogue would fit best. Because quite frankly, dialogue could go anywhere in the story. You can start with a dialogue hook. You can introduce the conflict with dialogue. You can respond to the conflict with dialogue. You can introduce the increase with dialogue, respond to the increase with dialogue. In during the climax, you can have dialogue, falling action dialogue, resolution dialogue. Dialogue can go anywhere, but you should not put it everywhere, meaning your entire story should not be dialogue. Not that it's not possible, and not that it's not going to make an interesting story. The issue is, remember, this is an exam. And in this exam, the examiners are going to be looking for certain skills and certain developments. They want to see your description. They want to see character description, setting description, use of figurative language, etc., etc. There's a checklist. Episode 13, if you don't have one, there's a checklist, right? So you need to express certain skills. And when you're doing dialogue, it limits that unless the student is a master at dialogue, which most students aren't when they're introduced to dialogue for the first time. So you want some paragraphs and some details in it without just having your whole story in dialogue. And so that means you need to be selective. Where are you going to put the dialogue? And that's what you're discussing with your child in your second 30-minute session. And here's a tip: you can create a template that says you will put dialogue at the complication and at the climax. Or you can decide you will put dialogue at the increase in conflict and at the resolution. You can plan ahead where you're going to put the dialogue and then practice integrating dialogue in that space. Because here's the thing: you need dialogue, but it doesn't have to be everywhere. So you get to choose. This is an exam. We're creating templates that we can practice over and over and master to get the most amount of marks possible. And so you can decide up front. And the only thing is, you need to have it at least two places. I would say maximum three places. So you don't want dialogue everywhere in your story. Maximum three places, minimum two places. And you want to have the dialogue where there's a kind of conversation in the story. So it's not just one person speaking. We do need to have a reaction to what the person said. And ideally, you want a reaction in speech, but you also need to have a reaction in actions. So when a character speaks, how do the other characters respond to what is being said? Do they ignore them? Do they act on it and do something? Do they react and say, "Nah, we don't like what you're saying"? How do the other characters respond? Because remember, in a narrative, we have cause and effect. We have the idea of the characters interacting with each other. Dialogue is a perfect place to have that happen. So this is what you're working on, right? So for your first session, reviewing dialogue templates, you're reading stories with dialogue. So this is a good time to make sure you have samples. And if you don't have samples, you can get, like I said, I have two options with samples. So the 7 stories challenge, which is the counterpart to the um 5 reports challenge. The 7 stories challenge, this one has 7 stories. So you get 7 samples in this one, plus 21 prompts, because in each booklet, so there's 7 specific booklets for the stories, plus you get some other booklets with, um, the plot and the checklist, and I think there's a booklet on descriptive writing and some other things. But you do get 7 sample stories. So you get science fiction, action adventure, folklore fairy tale, fantasy, um, thriller, suspense, mystery, and what is the other one? I can't remember. But there's 7 of them in any case. And so for each sample story in the booklets, you get also 3 prompts to choose from that you can use to write about. So 21 prompts, 7 sample stories. You really can't go wrong getting this if you don't already have a copy of it, and you can use this as you're practicing going along and revising as I'm talking about, where we're looking at dialogue. Go to the sample stories, see what the dialogue looks like, and then you can decide. You could make the choice where you want to put the dialogue based on how it was used in the sample stories, right? Now, if you already have a copy of this and you're looking for some additional samples, Then what we're looking at is the SCA CW samples. That's the new one that I have, and this one is just $50. And in this one, as I showed you, you're getting three sample stories. One action, one folklore, and one realistic fiction. And so for that one, um, you're also getting three report samples with this put together. So three report samples, three narrative samples, and a little bit of background information, not too much. So this is like pretty much straight samples. And so if you already have the seven stories and you want to supplement with some new samples, you can get this and supplement as well. But remember, your first 30-minute session, what you're doing is reviewing. And so you're looking at dialogue, how dialogue is used, action beats, dialogue tags, the type of information that's put in the dialogue. And then session two, you're practicing the dialogue. So you're pulling a prompt, going through and thinking, okay, what would people say to each other in this situation that would be interesting that I could include in my story? And so you're choosing a prompt and you're doing a quick plot, and then you are um, writing the dialogue. And so you want to write it within a paragraph. So you might want to do like paragraphs two and three in the prompt in response and see what it would look like. So you're not just doing the random write the dialogue alone kind of thing. You want to see how it's integrated into the story, how you introduce it and how you come out of the dialogue. And so if you're interested in seeing what that looks like, um in one of those episodes, I think it was episode 24, which is the integrating dialogue episode. That one, I did a sample and I shared screen where you could see that sample, just a sample of the dialogue, not the whole story. But if you want to get an idea of that, you can go ahead and check that episode as well. So that would be episode 24, integrating dialogue into stories. All right. If it's not there, check episode 23, but I think it should be in episode 24. All right, so that would be it for samples, and so you are going to be getting those those samples if you really want to see what they look like, and then based on that you can, feel free after you read the samples, any expressions or descriptions that you like, feel free to have your child review them and create their own that they would be able to use. If you want to just pull and use, then that's okay as well. This is what the samples are for, so that you could see how it's done and really make the most of the rest of the time that you have, right? And so here is where you get the samples and so on. And so what are we doing this week for narratives? Reviewing format of dialogue, first 30-minute session, practicing writing some dialogue in context, second 30-minute session. Third session, it's an hour, you're writing a complete story and you're reviewing what that dialogue should look like in that. So you're paying close attention. Of course, you're marking the whole thing, but you're paying extra special attention to how the dialogue would work in the story that you've written. And so that's your plan for narratives this week. So we've covered reports, we've covered narratives, and so now we're going to go into the comprehension. And so for comprehension this week, you're going back to fiction and nonfiction. Nope, not nonfiction. You're going back to fiction and poetry. Yeah, let me make a note of that. And so when you go back to the fiction and poetry, I've been really reviewing those most recently, and according to our schedule, I think this is it. Um, if you don't already have a copy of the comprehension schedule, you can get one. Like I said, SCA Peaceful Approach, it's there. Um, for you to download. But if you don't want to have to go through searching through the whole files, just send me a message and I'll send it to you. It's not a problem to do that at all. Right? But let me see. I'll tell you which episodes exactly to check which one. So for the comprehension, um, we did fiction on January 16, I believe, and then we did poetry would have been 2 weeks ago, which would have been like February 1st. Right? Let me see what episodes those are so you can go directly to those. Um, so 3 weeks ago. So let's say episode 35, and then you can go to Oh, I don't have the episodes listed according to the comprehension, so it's a little bit challenging. But then you're going like 5 episodes back. So if you're in 35, so that's one, two, three, and then four, five. So like episode 33 and 32, you're checking those. So when you go back to the natural disaster ones and so on, and you're checking through, you could see um, what more comprehension with that. So, all right, what are you doing with poetry comprehension and fiction comprehension this week? So for this week, you really want to review different types of fiction, different types of poetry. And in those episodes that I spoke about, where I went into a lot more detail with these, you'd realize that some poems aren't like the kind of poems that we read when we were little, right? They're not all, fun and games and rhyming and every line and, very happy and so on. They have a little bit more substance to them. And in fact, if you look at the SCA 2023 poem, I mean, I looked at it and I was like, I could imagine a student going into that exam and like, oh my, what is this? Because the rhyming scheme was really all over the place and the rhythm wasn't actually there. It was more like what a friend of mine calls prosody, right? Let me put that up. Prosody. And by that what I mean is like prose written in verse, so like a story written in verse, and with different stanzas and stuff, but it really didn't follow any kind of structure that would be familiar, that a child would say, ah, yes, this is a poem. All the lovely poems that we think students should be exposed to, all the rhyming ones that seem to be all happy and light-hearted. So yeah, no, that SEA 2023 poem was not that. um and so you really want to get your child or your students into the fact that poems come different ways and they might look differently, and the issues that come up, they're not all going to rhyme. You want to get them familiar with that so that when they get into the exam, if they get a poem like that 2023 poem, they're not going to feel overwhelmed, because like, "Oh, yeah, I've done poems like this before." You want them to feel confident going into the exam. So review some of those. And of course, if you want to review the poems from you want to review the poems from the last set of past papers, I recommend not going beyond 2019. Because remember, yes, there would be a lot of poems in, previous years, and you can get past papers all the way back to 2015, 14. Um, but the exam format changed in 2019. Remember, there was a 2019 to 2023 um, guideline that the ministry issued, and they're using it again in 24 because of COVID and all of these things. But you really want to work with that range then, because the format of the exam is going to be different, and the way the questions are asked, how responses are formatted in terms of the lines given and so on. So you don't want to go beyond 2019. Um, If you want to get a copy of that, if you don't already have a copy of the blank exams, they're actually available on the Ministry of Education website. So you can go to resources, Ministry of Education, primary school resources. And then if you scroll through the resources, you'll get they have the math exam, the ELA, and the creative writing. Everything is there for you to download and copy if you want the blank ones, right? If you want to get the answers, sample answers, and so on, I do have that available, and you can get that is 150, and you get 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and 23. So all five exams in the package, and what you're getting is the whole exam answers in the whole exam format, but then I grouped it so you'd get all the poetry in one. So all 5 years poetry in one file, all 5 years graphic in one file, and so on, tasks 1 to 3. You can get all spelling in one file, all grammar in one file, all punctuation in one file, so that you can study the exam and what came each year back to back so that you can see what it looks like and see patterns. Because believe you me, I've studied it and there are patterns and there are some questions, let's say for the grammar, that you would see coming every year or similar coming every year. So that you know if your child is struggling with that, this is a time to buckle down and make sure they get it right because they're likely to see that in the exam. So you really do want to study these things. And so while the past papers, we get the answers and so on, you really, really want to focus on studying the way the questions are phrased. And you would notice then that a lot of the practice tests, they give you similar to the exam and so on, but they're not exactly the exam. So you absolutely want to study the past papers and not just use practice tests. You want to study the actual exam from the people who are going to be creating or who have already created. In fact, the 2024 exam, you want to study the exams that they have done in the past to see how they're formatted and the kind of things that you'd be getting. So that's really what you want to work with the comprehension. So this week, study the poetry, study the fiction, and notice that you would get things like characters. And in the poem, you have different speakers. In the poem, the writer could be speaking to the reader. You can also have a character in the poem speaking to the reader. You can have a character in the poem speaking to another character in the poem. And so, who is speaking? Who are they speaking to? What are they trying to share? These are some background questions that you want to make sure your child can answer. Now, it's not going to necessarily be on the paper in a question, but knowing those answers and knowing how to find them is going to help the child really respond effectively to the comprehension when it comes to fiction and the and poetry. So that's what you're reviewing this week. So again, you have 3 sessions. First 30-minute session, look at poetry, do some reading of poetry, check through the past papers, see what the questions look like, see what the answers look like. Then, second 30-minute session, you're looking at fiction again. See what the questions look like, see what the passages look like, because a fiction passage is very different from a nonfiction passage. There's a lot dialogue is a thing, and I've noticed that the SEA stories tend to use a lot more dialogue and their paragraphs are a bit shorter and so on. So this is something that you can study. And the good news is that in studying the SEA fiction passage, you can get some ideas of how to write an SEA narrative as well. So this is also a thing that you can study and really understand the narratives. So maximize on your, we're looking for strategies, we're looking to maximize the time that we have, and we're working with the past papers above everything else, not just the practice tests. And so I will be announcing I'm working on a practice test I'm almost finished, and I've been almost finished for like about 3 weeks. But now that I've gotten these samples out of the way for the reports and narratives, I'm going to spend my time tomorrow finishing up that practice test. So before the end of the week, you'll be able to get a practice test and answers. Of course, I'll be giving the answers to the practice test, right? So you can do some practice with that. And for me, what I want to do is not just give you like a practice test alone. Remember, we're practicing comprehension. So, what I'll probably do is to include both a fiction and non-fiction in the passage, in the package. So, when you get the package, you'll get a fiction comprehension, non-fiction comprehension, poem comprehension, graphic comprehension, and then you'd also get tasks one, two, three. So you can put it together that way. So you'll be getting a full package, not just the one or the other, you'll be getting both. Right? So that's the package that I'm putting together. I'm finished with the comprehension, I'm finished with the fiction, non-fiction, and the poem and the graphic. It's the tasks one, two, three, because I'm still studying how the SE exam was formatted. So I want to really put those together. So it's just that to finish. I did this spelling already, so I'm still kind of working on the grammar. Grammar is always like that's like my my pain point, grammar, because I want to be so careful with it. But I should be finished with that soon. So by the end of the week, you have everything. You can get your additional samples, you can get your practice test, and you're good to go. And you're really maximizing the effort of it with your journey toward SEA 2024. So I think that's it for today. I think that was a lot. And yeah, 12:07. I went over the time again, but it was three sections. That's my excuse, three sections. If I do a little bit over in each section, a lot over. But I'm hoping that is helpful and that you're really getting the support in terms of how to study, how to prepare for the exam, what to prepare, and when, and how to build on each one so that your child would be most confident going into the exam and do their absolute very best when they meet SEA 2024. All right. So thank you so much for those of you who were able to stick through the time and really get the information. Of course, please send me messages. Let me know it was helpful. Let me know what I missed if you really wanted to find out something but I didn't mention it. Send me a message. Chances are I've done it already. I can send you a link to get the episode that you could review. If I haven't done it yet, then I'll do it next session next week. So please keep in contact. Let me know how things go. And because we're in this together, you're not alone. You're not suffering through to the end. You're getting support, and I'm here to help as much as possible. So do have a wonderful rest of the day today. I'm really happy to see so many of you taking in the live. This is Carnival Tuesday after all. I know lots of people are going to be looking at the replay. But thank you so much for your time. All right, guys. So take care, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Journey to SEA 2024. Take care. Bye bye.